The first warning shot came disguised as a welcome basket. I'm Colonel James Mitchell, retired, not that I introduced myself that way. After 32 years in the Army, including 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, I'd earned the right to be just Jim to my neighbors. At 63 years old, with a Distinguished Service Medal and too many scars to count, I'd moved to Riverside Meadows expecting peace, quiet, and maybe some decent fishing. What I got was war. The welcome basket appeared on my doorstep 3 days after I moved in. Wicker with a red gingham bow, containing store-bought cookies, a bottle of cheap wine, and a thick binder labeled Riverside Meadows Community Standards and Guidelines. There was a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. Welcome to our community. We pride ourselves on maintaining the highest standards of neighborhood excellence. Please review the enclosed guidelines carefully. Violations result in fines. Looking forward to meeting you at next month's HOA meeting. Patricia Vanderbilt, HOA President. The cookies were stale. The wine was terrible. And that binder was about to become the most important intelligence document I'd studied since leaving the military. Riverside Meadows was a planned community in Northern Virginia, built in 1998 for upper-middle-class professionals who wanted suburban perfection within commuting distance of D.C. 247 homes, each valued between $600,000 and $900,000. Tree-lined streets with names like Harmony Lane and Prosperity Circle, a community center with tennis courts, a pool, and a fitness room that required a key card to access. My house was a colonial revival at the end of Maple Ridge Drive. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, finished basement, 2-car garage. I'd bought it with my retirement savings after my wife Linda died from breast cancer 2 years ago. Our kids were grown. Sarah was a doctor in Seattle, Michael was teaching in Boston, and I didn't need much space. But I wanted a workshop for woodworking, a yard for my German Shepherd, and neighbors who'd leave me the hell alone. That last part proved optimistic. I spent the first week unpacking, setting up my workshop in the garage and walking Duke, my German Shepherd, through the neighborhood. The houses were beautiful in that sterile, magazine-perfect way. Every lawn precisely mowed. Every shrub carefully trimmed. Every mailbox identical. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like a movie set. On day 8, I met my neighbor from across the street. Gerald Henderson was a patent attorney in his 50s, slight build, wire-rimmed glasses, carrying a briefcase even on a Saturday morning. He crossed the street while I was working in my garage organizing tools. "You're the new owner?" "Jim Mitchell." I extended my hand. He shook it limply. "Gerald Henderson. Welcome to the neighborhood. I see you're settling in. Word of advice, Patricia Vanderbilt takes the community guidelines very seriously." I'd read that binder carefully if I were you. The HOA president? President, treasurer, and self-appointed neighborhood monitor. She's been running this HOA for 12 years, very particular about standards. Noted. Thanks for the heads up. Gerald glanced at my garage, which contained woodworking equipment, a table saw, various power tools. "Just so you know, the guidelines prohibit running commercial businesses from residential properties. If you're planning to sell furniture or anything, this is hobby woodworking. For personal use? Good. Just wanted to mention it." Patricia's very thorough about identifying potential violations. He left quickly, almost nervously. I didn't think much of it at the time. In retrospect, Gerald was trying to warn me about the minefield I'd just walked into. The first citation arrived on day 14. I found it taped to my garage door when I got back from the grocery store. Yellow envelope, official looking, with HOA violation notice printed across the top in bold red letters. Violation. Garage door left open during non-working hours. Section 7.42 of Community Guidelines. Observed. October 14th, 2025. 10:47 a.m., 3:22 p.m. Required remediation. Garage door must remain closed except during active ingress-egress of vehicles or when homeowner is actively working within garage space. Fine, $75, first offense. Subsequent offenses, $150 per occurrence. Compliance deadline. Immediate. I read it 3 times, trying to understand if this was satire. Someone had been monitoring my property closely enough to document that my garage door had been open for 3 hours and 35 minutes, and they were fining me $75 for it. I pulled out the binder and found section 7.4.2. It was real. Buried on page 147 of a 412-page document was a provision stating that garage doors should remain closed to maintain neighborhood aesthetic standards. This was insane. But I'd learned during 3 decades in the Army that you don't react to first contact. You gather intelligence, assess the enemy's capabilities, and plan your response carefully. I paid the $75 fine, and I started reading that binder cover to cover. What I discovered was fascinating in a horrifying way. The Riverside Meadows HOA guidelines weren't just rules. They were a comprehensive system of control that would make a military occupation jealous. Here's a sample. Section 3.2.1. Exterior paint colors must be selected from pre-approved palette, attached. Deviations require written approval from Architectural Review Committee. Minimum 45 days processing time. Section 4.16. Lawn grass height may not exceed 3 inches. Violations result in forced maintenance, at owner's expense plus administrative fees. Section 5.7.3. Holiday decorations may be displayed no earlier than 30 days before the holiday and must be removed within 5 days after. Violations $100 per day. Section 8.2.4. Pets must be leashed at all times when outside owner's property. Leash length may not exceed 6 feet. Breed restrictions apply. See Appendix F. Section 11.3.2. Home-based businesses prohibited unless specifically approved in writing by HOA board. Approval rate historically, 0%. Section 14.6.1. All visitors must display temporary parking pass, obtained from HOA office, if parking on street for more than 2 hours. It went on. And on. 412 pages of micro-regulations covering every conceivable aspect of daily life. And buried in Section 23.7.4 was the really dangerous provision. HOA Board has sole discretion to interpret guidelines and determine violations. Board decisions are final and binding. Homeowners who dispute violations may request formal hearing. Non-refundable $500 filing fee required. This meant Patricia Vanderbilt, who appointed herself president, treasurer, and compliance officer, had essentially unlimited power to fine residents for anything she deemed a violation. And challenging her cost $500 just to get a hearing. It was a perfect tyranny wrapped in the language of community standards. The second citation came 3 days later. This time for leaving my trash bins visible from the street on a non-collection day, Section 615. Another $75. The third citation came a week after that. Duke had barked at a squirrel while I was getting the mail. Someone reported it as excessive noise disturbance in Section 932, $100 fine. Each citation was signed by Patricia Vanderbilt and included increasingly hostile language suggesting that my cavalier attitude toward community standards was unacceptable. I decided it was time to meet Patricia face to face. The HOA office was located in a converted residential property near the community center. I knocked on the door at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. A woman's voice called, "Come in," with the kind of cheerful authority that instantly put me on alert. Patricia Vanderbilt was exactly what I expected. Mid-60s, silver hair styled in a way that probably required weekly salon visits, wearing a pantsuit that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She sat behind a large mahogany desk covered with stacks of files and a laptop showing what appeared to be a spreadsheet of violations. "Mr. Mitchell, I was wondering when you'd stop by. Please sit." She gestured to a chair positioned lower than her desk, a classic power move. I sat, keeping my posture relaxed but alert. 32 years in the Army taught you how to read adversaries. "I've received 3 citations in 3 weeks, I said calmly. I wanted to discuss whether there might be some misunderstanding. Patricia smiled the way a cat smiles at a mouse. No misunderstanding. Each citation reflects documented violations of community guidelines that you agreed to follow when you purchased property in Riverside Meadows. The garage door violation. Section 7.4 was very clear. Garage doors should remain closed except during active use. I was working in my garage, woodworking. I left it open for ventilation. Then, you should have been working continuously during those 3 hours and 35 minutes. Our compliance monitor noted that you left the property for approximately 40 minutes during that period. Your compliance monitor? I asked carefully. I have volunteers who help ensure standards are maintained. It's not surveillance, it's community care. That was surveillance. Someone had been watching my house closely enough to time my absence. The noise violation? I continued. My dog barked once at a squirrel. Section 9.3.2 prohibits noise disturbances. Multiple residents reported barking. How many residents? That information is confidential. But I assure you the complaints were legitimate. I'd learned in Iraq that when an adversary won't show you their intelligence sources, it usually meant those sources were fabricated or compromised. Mrs. Vanderbilt, I spent 32 years serving this country. I'm not looking for conflict, but these citations feel excessive for minor issues. Her expression hardened. Colonel Mitchell, yes, I'm aware of your military background. This community operates on principles of order and shared standards. Military service doesn't exempt you from following rules that everyone else follows. There it was. The real message. Your status doesn't matter here. I'm in charge, I understand. I'd like to review the process for challenging violations. Section 23.7.4, $500 non-refundable filing fee. Hearing scheduled at board's convenience. Board's decision is final. And who's on the board? Currently, myself as president, Donald Kershaw as vice president, and Marjorie Chen as secretary, all volunteers dedicating our time to maintaining this community's excellence. 3 people, with her as president having tie-breaking authority. It was a rigged system. I thanked Patricia for her time and left. As I walked to my car, I noticed a woman sitting in a sedan across the street taking notes. When she saw me looking, she quickly drove away. The compliance monitors weren't volunteers. They were paid watchers, and I was clearly being targeted. That night, I did what any good strategist does when facing a well-entrenched enemy. I gathered intelligence. I started with public records. Virginia HOA laws are matters of public record, accessible through county websites. I spent 6 hours reading Virginia Code Title 55-1, which governs property owners' associations. What I found was interesting. Under Virginia law, HOA boards have authority to enforce covenants, but that authority isn't unlimited. They're required to provide advance notice of board. Meetings, at least 14 days, allow. Homeowner attendance at all meetings except executive sessions. Make financial records available for inspection by any homeowner. Follow their own bylaws regarding elections and term limits. Act in good faith and not engage in selective enforcement. I pulled up Riverside, Meadows HOA's incorporation documents and bylaws. The last board election had been held in 2018, 7 years ago. According to the bylaws, elections were supposed to happen every 2 years. Patricia had been serving as president for 12 years, but she should have faced re-election 6 times. Those elections simply never happened. Strike one against the current board. They were operating illegally. Next, I requested financial records under Virginia Code Paragraph 55-1, 1866, which requires HOAs to make financials available within 10 business days of a written request. Patricia's response came back within 3 days, which was surprisingly fast. What was less surprising was the content. The records showed monthly HOA dues of $245 per household, which with 247 homes meant annual revenue of approximately $726,000. The major expenses listed were landscape maintenance, $185,000 a year pool and facility operations, $142,000 year insurance, $67,000 year administrative expenses, $225,000 year legal fees, $45,000 year miscellaneous, $62,000 year that. Administrative expenses line item caught my attention. $225,000 was enormous for a volunteer-run HOA. I dug deeper into the itemized records, buried in the details. Patricia Vanderbilt Consulting Services received $1,400 per month for HOA management services. Patricia wasn't a volunteer. She was paying herself $174,000 annually to run the HOA, which she controlled completely, since she'd never held legitimate elections. Donald Kershaw's law firm received $3,000 monthly for legal advisory services, even though the HOA also paid separate legal fees. Marjorie Chen owned the landscape company that received the $85,000 annual maintenance contract. The entire board was profiting from their positions while maintaining the fiction of being volunteers, serving the community. This was embezzlement dressed up as community service. Strike 2. Financial fraud. I made copies of everything and started building a case file. organizing documents the same way I'd organized intelligence reports in Baghdad. The fourth citation arrived while I was doing this research. This time for non-approved exterior modification, I'd hung a small American flag beside my front door. Section 12, 4.7 prohibited flags except on designated federal holidays. The fine was $200. I left the flag up, and I waited for Patricia's next move. It came 3 days later when I received a certified letter from Donald, Kershaw's law firm, threatening legal action if I didn't immediately remove the flag and pay the $200 fine plus a $50 late fee. Instead of complying, I filed a complaint with the Virginia Common Interest Community Board, which oversees HOA operations. My complaint detailed failure to hold required board, election self-dealing and conflicts of interest, board members profiting from their positions, selective enforcement of guidelines. I documented 17 other homes with similar violations that went uncited, improper fee structures. The $500 hearing fee violated Virginia law, which caps such fees at $250. The board acknowledged my complaint and opened an investigation. Meanwhile, I took a different tactical approach. I started attending HOA board meetings. The monthly meetings were held in the community center on the third Thursday evening. According to the bylaws, these were supposed to be open to all homeowners. In practice, hardly anyone attended. When I walked in at 7 p.m. on November 16th, Patricia looked genuinely shocked to see me. Colonel Mitchell, how unexpected. Virginia law requires meetings be open to homeowners. I'm a homeowner, of course. Please sit. There were 5 other people in the room besides Patricia, Donald, and Marjorie. I recognized Gerald Henderson from across the street. The others I didn't know. The meeting followed a rigid agenda that Patricia controlled completely. Financial reports, which she read without providing copies. Maintenance updates, approved without discussion. Violation reports, she had a list of residents who'd been cited. My name appeared 4 times. What was fascinating was what didn't happen. No voting. No debate, no homeowner input. Patricia simply announced decisions and moved on. When she opened the floor for homeowner concerns, I raised my hand. Yes, Colonel? I have questions about the financial reports, specifically the administrative expenses line item. Patricia's smile tightened. Those expenses cover management services essential to community operations. I noticed Patricia Vanderbilt Consulting Services receives $14,500 monthly. You're paying yourself $174,000 annually to manage this HOA, is that correct? The room went silent. Even the other board members looked uncomfortable. My company provides professional management services at rates competitive with third-party management companies. But the homeowners never voted to hire your company. And you have a direct conflict of interest. You're essentially paying yourself using homeowner funds. This arrangement has been in place for 8 years. If anyone had concerns, they could have raised them. Did anyone know about this arrangement? Was it disclosed at meetings or in annual reports? More silence. I let it hang there. Then I asked my second question. When was the last board election held? Donald Kershaw spoke up for the first time. That's not relevant to tonight's agenda. Actually, it is. Virginia law requires elections every 2 years. The bylaws specify the same. The last election appears to have been in 2018. That's 7 years ago. Patricia's composure was cracking. The homeowners have been satisfied with current board leadership. There's been no demand for new elections, because you've never actually called for elections, which means this board is operating without legitimate authority. Gerald Henderson actually gasped. The other homeowners looked confused but interested. I'm calling for an immediate election, I continued. Under Section 8.2 of the bylaws, any homeowner can petition for elections if they gather signatures from 20% of homeowners. That's 50 signatures. I'll have them by next week. Patricia stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. You can't adjourn during homeowner concerns. That's in the bylaws, too. We stared at each other across the room. I'd spent decades commanding troops under fire. Patricia's attempt at intimidation through bureaucratic authority was almost quaint. She sat back down. Fine, finish your statement. I'm organizing a petition for new elections. I'm also requesting full financial audit by an independent accounting firm. Virginia Code Par 55-1-1828 requires HOAs to provide audits when requested by 20% of homeowners. I'll have those signatures too. You're wasting everyone's time and money. I'm exercising my legal rights as a homeowner. If this board has nothing to hide, an election and audit shouldn't be problems. I left the meeting with Gerald Henderson and 2 other homeowners following me to the parking lot. They wanted to know more. I gave them my contact information and suggested they read the financial records carefully. The next morning, I had 27 emails from Riverside Meadows residents asking how they could help. By the end of the week, I had 83 signatures, far more than the 50 required, demanding elections and an independent audit. Patricia's response was predictable and desperate. She sent a community-wide email claiming I was a disruptive presence trying to destabilize the HOA. She cited my 4 violations as evidence of my disregard for community standards. She urged residents not to sign my baseless petition, but it was too late. The signatures were valid. Under Virginia law, the HOA board was required to hold elections within 45 days of receiving a valid petition. Then Patricia made her biggest mistake. She tried to force me out before the election could happen. I received a cease and desist letter from Donald Kershaw's law firm, claiming my American flag violated HOA guidelines and represented ongoing defiance of community standards. The letter demanded I remove the flag, pay accumulated fines now totaling $850, and agree to a compliance plan that would require board approval for any future exterior modifications. If I didn't comply within 7 days, they'd file a lawsuit seeking to place a lien on my property and force a sale to cover unpaid fees and ongoing violations. They were trying to foreclose on my house over an American flag. That was their fatal error. I contacted the Institute for Justice, a libertarian nonprofit that specializes in property rights cases. They took my case immediately, pro bono. The attorney assigned, Jessica Ramos, was a sharp Harvard Law graduate who'd won 3 major HOA cases in the past 2 years. They're threatening to foreclose over a flag? Jessica's voice over the phone was delighted. Oh, this is going to be fun. Within 48 hours, Jessica filed a federal lawsuit under 42 U.S.C., paragraph 1983, claiming the HOA's actions violated my First Amendment rights. She also filed complaints with the Virginia State Bar against Donald Kershaw for conflicts of interest and improper legal representation, and she contacted every major news outlet in Northern Virginia. The story hit the Washington Post 3 days later. Joe threatens to foreclose on retired colonel's home over American flag. It went viral immediately. By noon, there were news trucks parked outside Riverside Meadows. Patricia refused all interviews, but I didn't. I stood on my front porch with Duke beside me and the flag behind me and explained everything. The illegal board, the financial self-dealing, the petty violations, the attempt to silence me through foreclosure. That evening, I was on CNN. By morning, Fox News and MSNBC had both covered the story. My case became a symbol of HOA overreach and bureaucratic tyranny. The pressure on Patricia, Donald, and Marjorie became immense. The Virginia Common Interest Community Board accelerated their investigation. The IRS opened an inquiry into potential tax fraud related to the board's financial arrangements. Donald Kershaw was suspended from practicing law pending a state bar investigation. 2 weeks after the story broke, Patricia called me directly. What do you want? Her voice was defeated. I want you and your entire board to resign. Immediately. I want an independent forensic audit of the last 8 years of finances. I want new elections held within 30 days. And I want every single citation you've ever issued reviewed for legitimacy. And if we do that, then I'll agree not to pursue criminal charges for embezzlement. The civil lawsuit continues until we've recovered misappropriated funds, but you stay out of prison. Silence. You destroyed us, she finally said. No, you destroyed yourselves. You built a system of petty tyranny and corruption, and assumed nobody would ever call you on it because challenging you was expensive and exhausting. You just happened to pick the wrong person to bully. Patricia resigned the next day. So did Donald and Marjorie. The entire board dissolved. Elections were held 6 weeks later. I didn't run. Instead, I helped organize a slate of candidates who actually wanted to serve the community rather than profit from it. Gerald Henderson became president. A retired accountant named Sharon Lee became treasurer. All 5 board positions filled with people who'd been victims of Patricia's reign. The forensic audit revealed $340,000 in misappropriated funds over 8 years. Patricia, Donald, and Marjorie settled the civil case by repaying the full amount, plus interest rather than face criminal prosecution. The HOA guidelines were completely rewritten. The new version was 15 pages instead of 412. It focused on essential maintenance and safety rather than aesthetic control, and my American flag still hangs beside my front door. Nobody said a word about it. 6 months after the whole thing ended, Gerald stopped by while I was working in my garage. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "I lived here for 12 years under Patricia's thumb and never had the courage to fight back." "You didn't have the training," I replied. "I spent 3 decades learning how to identify enemy positions, gather intelligence, and execute strategic operations. This was just another mission. Still, you saved this neighborhood. I thought about that." "No, I just removed a hostile occupying force. You all saved it by taking control of your own community. These days, Riverside Meadows actually feels like a neighborhood. People talk to each other, kids play in yards, dogs bark occasionally, garage doors stay open when people are working. It's not magazine perfect anymore, but it's real, and that's worth more than any amount of artificial aesthetic excellence." Patricia moved to Florida. Last I heard, she's keeping a low profile and definitely not volunteering for any homeowners associations. As for me, I finally got that peace and quiet I was looking for. Most days I work in my garage building furniture. Duke barks at squirrels without anyone filing complaints. My flag flies proudly, and if another HOA ever tries the same scheme somewhere else, they should remember this. Sometimes the quiet retired guy at the end of the street isn't just a homeowner. Sometimes he's a colonel who spent 32 years learning how to win wars. And HOA tyrants are a lot easier to defeat than insurgents.